Hi, my name is Brendan Pinniger. I'm a collaboration architect working for Cisco Systems. And today I want to show you a very simple web application that I've written that allows a user to choose a video endpoint and then allows them to control the camera presets for that video endpoint. So first of all, what I'm showing you on the screen here is my iPhone running the web app. So this could run on a mobile device, a tablet or a PC. And the first thing I'm going to do here is actually choose the video endpoint that I want to connect to. So this is just connected to my lab, and we've got a few different endpoints here. The one I'm going to use for the demo is the SX20 here. So I'll simply select that one and then hit the submit button. Right, so what the code's done there is it's grabbed the IP address of the endpoint, and then it's gone and used the APIs for the codec itself to pull back the camera presets. So we can see here I've actually got 3 presets configured. Now if you look at the main video channel, you'll see the display there, which my SX20 is connected to. Yes, that's an EX90, but I'm just using it as a display. So the first thing I'll do is I'll select the zoom in camera preset. As you can see, that's zoomed right in on me now. And then I've also set up one that zooms into a picture up on the wall. Right, and then I can go back to the overview camera preset as well. It's very, very simple. If I wanted to go to another room and select a different endpoint, I can certainly do that by clicking on the home link there, and it takes me back to my other endpoints. I'm just going to leave that now and take you quickly through the code. As I mentioned, it's quite simple, but there are a few different files required to get all this to run. So I'm just going to switch over to Visual Studio, where I've written the code. So this has all been built in Python, and I'm also using Flask, which is a Python package that allows you to easily render web pages. So first of all, what we're looking at here is my main routes Python script. So a couple of things I've done. So I've got the routes in here, but I've also created some modules with my functions, right? And my functions are what I'm using to utilize the APIs for both Communications Manager as well as the video endpoints. So first of all, I've got an endpoints module, and there's a couple of functions here. One where I get the endpoints, and another one where I get the IP address of the endpoint that's been selected. The next one is the codec module, and I've got 3 functions in there. The first one gets the presets from the codec. This next one actually sends the presets, and I've also got one that just simply brings the endpoint out of standby mode if it happens to be in there. So pretty simple. To take you through my routes, first of all, I've got the main page. I really just have 2 HTML files, which I'll show you in a minute. But my first route will actually use a form. And the first thing I do before I get to the form is I've got to get the endpoint. So here's where I call my function. Right, so this imports that from the endpoints.py module, and my get endpoints function uses the Axel API to talk to Communications Manager, and simply goes and finds a list of devices there, and I'm filtering on SX codecs with that. Right, so once I've got the endpoints, now I'm actually able to render my form, which again is this index.html form. I'm going to show you the HTML code. Again, this is very, very simple. There's not much to this. I simply create a select field here, which has my endpoint list in it, and then below that is my button where you can hit submit to select the endpoint. So very, very simple. So once you've selected the endpoint, the next thing I do is when you submit the form, it comes back as a post. And the next thing I've got to do is, now I know the endpoint name, I need to get the IP address of it. So this again calls a function from my endpoints module, get IP address. Now this uses a different API, it uses the RISPort70 API, which is part of the serviceability APIs of Communications Manager. So the Axel API doesn't have the IP address because this is dynamic, this can change, so it's not actually stored in the database. Right, so slightly different API, but both Axel and RISPort70 use SOAP, so I've had to create SOAP requests to get the information. Right, so I simply pass through the information using Xtree there to get the IP address of the endpoint. Right, so pretty simple again. Once I've done that, now I'm able to actually send this over to my presets HTML form. And before I load that presets HTML page, I'm going to get the preset. So this is actually using the function now from my codec module. Right, so using the codec API, so I'm going directly to the IP address of the codec. So that's passed in this IP variable here. And I'm using requests, so this is a REST-based API, using the request module. And I'm then going through and finding the preset names and the preset ID. And I'll pass that back into my routes.py script. So once I've got that detail, I can pass those through as parameters, all that information to my presets HTML page. And if I jump over to the presets HTML, again, this is quite simple. I'm actually using a table here, and I'm then dynamically creating a row with a button for each camera preset that's available. All right, so multiple rows, this is all dynamic. And then when you click on that button, it's going to send the code back to my send preset route back on my main page here. So here's my send preset route. Just getting some arguments there, and the next thing I do is I just deactivate standby mode, just in case the system is sitting in standby, and then I will send the preset. So again, a couple of very simple little API calls here. So here's my deactivate standby, just sending that to the IP address. Should get a simple 200 OK response, and then after that, my send preset, again talking to the codec, sending that through, and I should get a quick response there as well. And then once I've done that, I actually reroute this back to the main presets page, just passing through the information on whether that was successful or not. So that's it, very, very basic. The one last thing I'll show you is I have a separate config Python module here where all my parameters are set. So I've got the IP address of the communications manager. You do need to set the correct version that's compatible with the communication manager version, so what your actual API is using. And then I've got some password parameters, which obviously you don't want to set that into your actual code, so I'm using environment variables for both communications manager as well as the video endpoint passwords. So you would need to create a standard username and password that's configured on all the video systems that you want to use. The last thing here is just the filter. So again, I'm filtering on SX endpoints based on the description field. Right? So you can filter the list that you get back from Communications Manager either by name of the devices or by the description of the devices. So that's something you can modify in the code depending on how you've got that set up within your environment. Right, so that's it. Thanks very much for your time, and have a good day.